going to tell you a little something about that, not that day in terms of the events. We're going to address that. But I think that there's a context for this whole thing because there's this notion that something happened here that didn't actually happen here. It's like you see it, but it's not exactly what you saw. Now, either you believe, or one believes, that John Huggins and Bunchy Carter were killed here on Campbell Hall on January 17, 1969, in some sort of tribalism, in some sort of a conflict with another black organization, or you recognize that they were assassinated because they were leaders of the Black Panther Party who were bringing important lessons to this campus and that were dangerous to the interests of the United States government and even to the administration of this school. So you can believe that this was just some little conflict that just happened one day, or you can understand what was going on. We know and we can assert with clarity that they were assassinated by what is well documented now as a government conspiracy by the FBI and others to destroy the Black Panther Party. No other organization in the country has ever been so targeted by the government for destruction. So we have to recognize that they were leaders in the Black Panther Party, remembering that just before their assassinations, J. Edgar Hoover, as director of the FBI, issued an edict that a statement that the Black Panther Party was the single greatest threat to the internal security of the United States, and that the Black Panther Party needed to be dismantled, discredited, or destroyed by any means. Now, when you recognize that that happened in 1968, and we know about something about the COINTELPRO operations, and we know that one of its goals was to prevent the rise of a black messiah, and we understand that in Los Angeles, in the Southern California chapter, the first chapter of the Black Panther Party, in August of 1968, months before John and Bunchy were killed, you had three young brothers out on the street at Adams and Montclair named Tommy Lewis and Steve Bartholomew and Robert Lawrence, who were mowed down by police right there on the streets. You have to remember that in December of 1968, Franco Diggs, a member of the Black Panther Party Southern California chapter, was murdered. And you have to also remember that in that same month, the end of December of 1968, Bunchy Carter announced to the world that the Black Panther Party in Southern California was forming a coalition with the Brown Berets. There had never been a black-brown coalition of this type. This was very dangerous stuff getting ready to happen, wasn't it? That happened, and we are still talking about black-brown conflicts. But in 1968, Bunchy took the lead and organized with the Brown Berets and said that our causes were united because we had a common oppressor and a common interest in liberation. And we have to remember also earlier in that year, in April of '68, Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered and assassinated. And nobody in his right mind or her right mind today believes that he was assassinated by James Earl Ray, who figured out how to do all the things that happened to get Dr. King killed. Dr. King was not killed, though, in connection with the garbage workers' strike. Dr. King was killed because he was organizing a poor people's campaign talking about what is happening here? Talking about the redistribution of wealth of this country and organizing to have everyone, millions of people, come to Washington, D.C. We also have to remember that 1968, the year before John and Bunchy were assassinated, there was a massive student uprising in San Francisco State. Massive, the biggest student uprising in the country. It was led by black students, and particularly a guy named George Murray, who was at that time the Minister of Education of the Black Panther Party. Put all of those pieces into the context of what was it that John Huggins and Bunchy Carter represented the day that they were killed. At the same time, the Cold War was raging. America was fighting communism all over the world, and particularly in Africa. By 1960, the CIA had sponsored the overthrow of Lumumba, who was close to the Soviet Union in the Congo, and installed someone named Mobutu. Malcolm X had just visited Ben Bella in 1965 in Algeria, who was a leader of the FLN, and was becoming very, very conscious about world revolutionary struggles of oppressed people. You had something called UNITA that was being supported by the CIA in Angola against the Angolan uprising under the MPLA. You had the sudden death of Nkrumah, who had identified neocolonialism and organized the Organization of African, the OAU. You had the leadership of Julius Nyerere, who was a socialist in Tanzania. And you had, of course, the Frelimo in Mozambique. There were other efforts in the world for liberation, like in Palestine, led by the PFLP, Palestine Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Popular Front rather. And of course, the Vietnam War was raging. In this very context, in 1965 in Los Angeles, you had the Watts Rebellion. What's the significance of that? The entire country exploded around the Watts Rebellion. Everything changed. The Kerner Commission issued a report. Why are these black people angry? Because there are two Americas, one black, one white, separate and unequal. All of this was issued in 1967. And now in 1968, Huey P. Newton, in prison, charged with the murder of a white police officer in Oakland, issues a statement that the Black Panther Party not only supports the liberation struggle of the Vietnamese people, but we are offering arms and men and women to go and fight alongside the Viet Cong in Vietnam against the U.S. imperialist forces. You can see this is getting to be dangerous, can't you? There was a Free Huey movement going on in 1968 all over the country. People were saying Free Huey or else the sky's the limit. Now, put that into the context of Bunchy Carter coming out of prison and saying, I have been transformed. I am not just living on the streets for me. I am talking about my people, and I am going to organize those brothers and sisters that I know on the streets of Los Angeles, many of whom were in street organizations like the Slawsons. And I'm going to help them to see that they're not each other's enemies, but that we are united around a liberation agenda. That's who Bunchy Carter was. Now, when the High Potential Program offered an opportunity for us to become students and work on this campus, we seized that opportunity. And that was mainly led at that point by John Huggins. And John would be, just as we've said, be out here on this campus everywhere. One thing we were doing is trying to get the black students to oppose the war. Black people running around talking about the war is not the business of black people. This is some other thing. And John Huggins targeted the CIA recruiting office that sat openly on this campus at the time. And we talked about bringing skills of the students back into the community, bringing the resources of campus back into the community. We talked about uniting the community and the campus. That was the message of John Huggins and Bunchy Carter. The assassin was not a student at UCLA. The assassin was behind a door and came out and put a bullet into the back of John Huggins and killed him. And when Bunchy Carter turned, he put a bullet into Bunchy Carter's chest and killed him. What had this to do with the Black Studies program? Were we vying for control of it? No. Was there some money involved for the Black Panther Party? No. Now later that day, the only people that were arrested around that assassination was everybody who was in the Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party, including Erica Huggins and her 3-week-old baby, Mai Huggins. And we were all taken to jail. And we were charged with conspiracy to commit murder against the assassin and his organization. Later, we know that the assassin escaped and is still gone, and the last thing we heard was living in Guyana, the same country where the two conspirators who were convicted escaped from San Quentin prison miraculously years later and also ended up in Guyana. Now when we look at all of this, we have to understand this was no rivalry, this was a government conspiracy to take out significant members of the Black Panther Party. The rest of that year, 1969, a member of the Black Panther Party in Southern California was certainly arrested almost every day. We had murders of people almost every month. Then we have to ask what Dr. King asked after the passage of the 1964-65 Civil Rights Voting Rights Acts, and that is, where do we go from here? What do we do with what we now know? These young students gave us one example. What did they do? But we want to talk about where do we want to go with this, and what kind of society do we in fact want to live in? Is there any lesson that we can add to this? Sometimes young people say to me, and all of us, they say, well, why didn't you pass the baton to us? Because I didn't have a baton. I was dragging a blood-stained banner from this building and on through history. I was thinking that you were going to come along and pick it up. And so it's up to you to pick up the blood-stained banner